it's so nice to see so many familiar faces tonight. So welcome everyone. We'll get Ben to come sit down. And we met the panelists, but will I be passing?
Yeah, we'll do quick intros, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Do they need the mic?
Yeah, we can pass it. This one hopefully works, and hopefully we can get this one too. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, why don't we go, Shira? Do you want to tell us a little bit about your current role and your past roles, and kind of give us a history or a little bit of information how you've worked in both consumer and enterprise? Just kind of your work history.
Yeah, this is my second time at Google, and I'm in Google Cloud AI, but I was in search and maps before, so very big consumer products. And before that, I was in ad tech at Yahoo, director of ads and data, UX. So another big enterprise, complex products, and I've also done some in-house kind of I've had my own consulting company, and I've worked for consultancies, and so kind of startups and the whole thing. It's been a long time. I started in 1999, so UX was kind of a word that came about in, I think, probably about 2004. So I think we were doing UX before that, but I will pass the mic.
Hi, yeah, I'm Anthony. I'm a product designer at Jasper, currently focused on the enterprise workflows side of our product. Prior to that, I worked at Dropbox, as Ben mentioned, HubSpot, and I got my career started in 2 consumer-based products. I started at Wayfair and DraftKings before that. So, but I've been a designer for about 10 years.
Hi everyone, consumer side, currently I'm the senior manager for content strategy at Adobe, specifically for Document Cloud, which is Acrobat. I've been there for about 5 months. Previously, consumer side, I worked here locally as the leader of UX content strategy at Sharp Healthcare, so a lot of consumer focus there and employee focus. Enterprise side, most of my experience is on the internal employee experience, where I led content design for employee experience at Meta and Autodesk. And I'm excited to talk about the content strategy side of this conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Anne. I also go by Anna. I am currently a senior product designer at SeatGeek, which is a ticketing and entertainment company that sells tickets. And I work on the mobile team now, so there was a reorg, so I'm not used to saying that, but I've only been there for about 2 months, so I'm very new to that space. But yeah, most of I guess this is a very consumer-esque role, but prior to being at SeatGeek, I was at LinkedIn. I initially worked on the editorial team, which was a lot of overlap in the enterprise spaces because it was internal tooling, just allowing editors to publish, edit, and write news content that gets pushed out to the native apps. There was another reorg where I basically got pushed into the feed team, which is kind of like social media, the things that you're interacting with, liking with. So it's mega, ultra consumer kind of esque, and that's kind of how I landed in more of a consumer world. I started out in enterprise, so like Ben mentioned, I was at Workday post-grad, and then I was also at ServiceNow, where I interned there during undergrad. And I mainly worked on financial revenue software and procurement software, so yes, I don't know if people are familiar with that. I definitely wasn't when I first joined, but that's what enterprise teaches you a lot about business workflows and things like that. But yeah, happy to chat.
Oh yeah. Is this working, or is this still not working? Okay, good, it's working now. So I'm Ben. I've been at ServiceNow for about 3 years. Prior to that, I worked at a consumer-based company that called Bold, that was like a late-stage startup. Think of like TurboTax, but instead of creating your tax forms, it creates highly polished, beautiful-looking resumes and cover letters. So definitely it was really interesting working in that space. Before that, I was at a small enterprise software company called Salesforce. Maybe you've heard of it. Working on the customer success team. So basically I worked in a team that was an enablement team that once customers bought products, my team worked to help them educate and learn how to use them so they would see the value of the products they bought and have a much higher likelihood of subscribing. And worked at a bunch of other places that I won't go into right now, that both on the consumer and enterprise side, as well as running my own business where I had a small product design consultancy. Right in top.
Okay, I think this works now. Shira, when we were talking earlier, like when we talked last week, you had kind of said that it's almost like the brain and the heart when it comes to consumer and enterprise. Can you kind of unpack the differences between consumer and enterprise from your experience? And then I'd love to hear from some of the other panelists on how you might describe the differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably an overgeneralization to say this brain and heart thing, but just having worked in both environments, I feel like in consumer product design, we're closer to the user. We would get a lot more feedback from a lot more users, and we cared a lot about the user directly. Whereas in enterprise, your direct customer is the enterprise, and then the users are the employees of the enterprise typically. So, and because you're dealing with kind of intense workflows and complicated interfaces and a lot of connections out to other products, it's very thinky. So to me, those are kind of the primary differences between the two types of UX. And I think there's a lot of other differences too. And you can have a very heart-centered experience in enterprise design and a very thinky experience in consumer design, of course, but yeah.
That's great. Yeah, Jennifer, do you want to describe what you see as some of the differences?
Okay, I think one of the really lovely things about working on the enterprise employee side is that it's a nice blend of both. You are solving really hard problems for the business where you're trying to drive business outcomes like efficiency or getting very specific roles to do very specific tasks at scale, but you're also driving a sense of connection and community and engagement among employees to drive information. Or drive a feeling about a certain campaign or something that the company is doing. So you have this mindset of solving business problems, but also meeting employees where they are or where the company wants them to be. And you're very close to your user as well as you're building these experiences at scale for very, very large companies. So I think that's a nice in-between moment to be in as a designer, whether it's a content designer or a product designer.
Yeah, and I'll try to land this plane, but I just thought of this analogy recently, but design's a trade and a craft like any other, right? Like, so plumbers will go to someone's house and have to fix their toilet or something like that. But the plumbing for this building in particular, or any of these buildings in here, they have the same principles in how they have to solve and think about those problems, but there's more scale. There's a lot more complexity and nuance to the enterprise side of things. They still have the same kind of tools and problems to solve the issues that they're trying to fix in that space, and I think design's pretty similar in that sense. Hopefully that landed. I don't know. I'm not a plumber, so I don't actually know.
I liked it.
Yeah.
And Anna, what about you? You know, you've gone from ServiceNow, and then you went to like almost like SeatGeek. I know you've only been there a little while, but you know, what are some of the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, thank you. I love this question too. The main difference I think I realized when I kind of transitioned from an enterprise company to a more consumer company, which was actually between ServiceNow and LinkedIn, was really that the type of people that you're servicing are not forced to use your product at all in some consumer spaces. So there's a lot of meticulous elements around how do we influence people's behaviors, how do we build the best things, because we literally need to based off of our revenue. And the connection there, I think, like Shira mentioned, directly to the users is so critical in a consumer space versus not versus in an enterprise space, but it's quite different from an enterprise space. When I was working in enterprise, the difference is that obviously there's like contractual agreements that companies have to make their employees use the products like ServiceNow or like Workday and things like that. So it's just much more different, I think, being a designer in that space, because you do want to make the product a lot better, but I don't think that a certain button or icon or color change is associated directly to the revenue that a company makes. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Jennifer, I'd like to, you had joked earlier when you got here that you might be one of the only content designers, although there is another in the audience. But if you can kind of let the people here know what content design is, and then what are the different content needs in each of these spaces?
It's an age-old question, what is content design? What is content strategy? I think of it as enabling the flow of information. It doesn't have to be just words. It's thinking about in what format, in what shape, in what tone, in what voice do I need to enable someone or motivate someone to do something through a user journey. And so the content strategists on my team at Adobe, we call them content strategists. At Meta, it was content designers. They are not only writing the words, they're also thinking about how to get information across in different ways. A lot of times, unfortunately, they're thought of as just words people, but there's so much more to the strategic thinking of what is the user what are we trying to solve, what does the user need to do, and how do we enable or motivate people to get through a flow. I forgot the rest of your question.
And then just thinking about in the differences between enterprise and consumer,
Right.
the content design experience.
Right. So we're fundamentally thinking about the same things, about user needs, about user motivations and outcomes. What are we trying to drive? On the enterprise side, you have very specific roles and different business domains. And the motivation is really about driving, like I said earlier, business outcomes of efficiency and encouraging people to complete a certain task that may be something they have to do. It's not necessarily something they want to do, but for the business to be successful, they need to do it. On the consumer side, you have a really diverse audience with really diverse needs and perspectives, and their motivations may not have motivations. We are trying to motivate them to do something, to make a purchase, to sign up for something, different types of outcomes. And I think the way the content strategy differs is thinking about what are we trying to do? Is it enablement or is it motivation? And how do we create content that helps people understand? On the enterprise side, it's a lot of super heavy documentation a lot of the time to help people with onboarding and training and getting the help they need to go through a huge task. The consumer side, we want the experience to be simple and straightforward and intuitive. We don't want them to have to go to help text. And so we try, and we can also infuse delight and voice and tone and have more nuance on the consumer side, where on the enterprise side, it's really straightforward. You just need to get people in and out and do the thing they need to do. And so I think those are the things that we really think about when we're driving a content strategy. It's kind of the same, it's just a little bit of a different flavor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, having worked on growth at a few different companies too, some of the best experiments you can run and see the biggest impact is just changing the wording of the button. It will literally change so much, and it's pretty wild. Like some of the smallest experiments can have the biggest impact.
Well, we can't go this far into our panel discussion and not talk about AI. So can each of you kind of talk about how you're using AI and what kind of use cases, if you can let us know, you're kind of designing for in each of your spaces? That would be great to hear.
AppSheet, is this on?
Yeah.
AppSheet started as a no-code enterprise app software, I guess, that was positioned with Google Workspace. So you could, for example, go from making, a Google Sheet, and you could turn it into an app. You can turn your sheet into an app, and you can automate it, and you can connect it to other data sources and other products that you use in your enterprise. Now we are using Gemini to generate apps from prompts, which is pretty cool. And we're doing some work with agents that I probably can't get into too much. But that's been exciting, and then also how to infuse our end app user experience with AI. So I think another place where we're looking into, how can AI be a differentiator is with the admin experience, and how can you give them insights and summarize things, and give them a way to do their job more easily through the admin console. It affects fewer people, but it's a little more close to the buyer. It's a little more direct. So.
Is the question related to our process and design or the products that we're working on?
It was more the products, but I'm okay with if you want
Okay,
to talk
no,
about
no,
process.
that's fine too. And actually, we probably should keep quiet about the stuff that we're working on, but because you said a lot of things that I'm working on as well. But yeah, so if anyone that doesn't know, Jasper is an AI marketing company and I'm focused on workflows, and we're building no-code apps as well from prompts and things of that nature as well. But so Jasper, being an AI-forward business, it's pretty spread out across everything that we do, through chats and through suggestions and through generations and enhancements to your writing and the content that you're creating for your marketing campaigns and things of that nature. So it's pretty prevalent and becoming more and more as we find new ways through things like agents or apps that people are looking to build to really customize and build things into their workflows to generate things that are very hyper-specific to the business, to the marketing that you're trying to do, and things of that nature. So it's becoming more, and there's always new things coming out and changing, and the technology is continuing to grow, and there's more and more opportunities that keep presenting itself.
At Adobe, specifically on Acrobat, we're using something called AI Assistant to help you make sense of, synthesize the documents you're working in. You can chat with your documents, ask them questions, summarize, things like that, and we're building a lot more robust capability there at the moment. At Autodesk, we were building, again on the employee side, we were using generative AI-powered chatbots to help in the employee experience, specifically through Slack. And one of the really neat things that the content strategy team was able to consider and implement across the enterprise was a knowledge management strategy. And it's not something I or the team had thought about before in terms of where is this information coming from that's going into AI? What are the sources? And they're across ServiceNow, they're across SharePoint, they're across Confluence, they're across all of these different platforms that are all very different and all have different operating models, different systems needing to be output into a specific voice or tone and in a specific format. So thinking through who's creating this content, who's auditing it and managing it, so what is the governance model, how does it need to be presented, and coming up with that enterprise-wide knowledge management strategy to factor in how we would deliver content through AI. How would we measure success? Was it through accuracy? Was it through user sentiment? This was something that the content and design teams were able to interface directly with engineering on to try to implement. And the really neat thing about it being in the employee space was we could be really innovative and we could take bold risks and we could tinker and learn and iterate really quickly and share our learnings with the external-facing Autodesk Assistant team to then put into market. So that's kind of how I've been working on generative AI since, not as deeply involved on the Adobe side yet, but I'm really interested in seeing if there's that knowledge management need at Adobe.
I have an interesting relationship with AI. I remember when ChatGPT came out and everyone was freaking out. Everyone's putting these bubbles on everything to summarize the captions of your Instagram or your Facebook posts and stuff. But yes, so when that happened, I was actually on the internal tooling team at LinkedIn, and that was a really interesting space because there's just a kind of a blank canvas to really help our editors and help them summarize and help them write news articles really easily with generative AI. So I guess you write a sentence you want to write about Facebook or any news industry that's happening, and it really helps to elevate these people's workflows. It allows them to write quicker, write more efficiently, brainstorm. It's obviously a tool that supplements their existing work, which I think is kind of the foundations that AI kind of lays on in this enterprise space. In the consumer space, it gets a little bit complicated. It's not always a chatbot that people want. It's, you want to talk to a person, you press 0 when you're on customer phone calls. And so it's very interesting how some companies are approaching this, as well as previously at LinkedIn and possibly at SeatGeek, I don't know. But yeah, it's not always a chatbot that I think is the solution, especially with AI and with generative AI, I think AI can have a space in consumer platforms, but it could be a lot more subtle. It could be recommendation engines. It could be just really knowing who your users are and surfacing the right things at the right time. And so I think that's something that Spotify does really well as a company, but I don't work there, but they're really cool. So yeah, I think it's very different, like the differences between AI in an enterprise space and how it really elevates like the tooling and efficiency and as a consumer and how we actually want to use it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and then can I just add? At ServiceNow, AI is a huge part of our business. It's a huge focus. For those who paid attention to news, we recently spent nearly $3 billion to acquire a startup called MoveWorks that is an AI agentic startup. For me, I focus on employee experience tools, and so it's a really big deal. I'm currently working on reimagining our task center, which basically anything you do for work, it could be if you're a manager, something like an approval, like your employee requests a new laptop, and you traditionally have to get that request, but the information isn't all in that request. You have to then go check policies, check how much budget you have against how much you have for this laptop, and there's a lot of manual things that happen. So with AI, we're really looking specifically at agentic AI of having agents that can do such things as like check the policy, check the budget, wrap all the information up, and give you a recommendation that based on the information you should approve or not approve this request, for instance. And that's just like one place. Internally, we're using a lot of tools like the Writer app, which we've taught to know our voice and tone and style guide. So now we don't have to ask content design every time we have a question of like what that button should say. We're able to use Writer's tools and have that information right inside of our Figma. So lots and lots of places where AI is very important.
Sure. So I think there's this perception that content design and content strategy do screenwriting, which is like the label, the button, the menu item. And there's so much more to it. There's systems and frameworks and standards that we're building that enable us to have impact at scale. And that's where that much bigger thinking comes in. And we're actually looking at tools like Writer to help enable us to do more strategic work and take us out of that screenwriting mentality, and also to enable designers to do work that they can trust and feel confident in because those guidelines are already baked in. So I think there's so many capabilities out there that we can take advantage of that don't risk our roles.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Anna, you were talking about, when we chatted earlier, about how mobile is kind of one of those differentiators, especially in the space that you're in now. Can you talk a little bit about how important mobile is, at SeatGeek?
Yes. So when I was working at enterprise, it wasn't a priority at that time for mobile for like an enterprise financial tool to be on a mobile app. It was more so the vision, I guess, like somebody wakes up and checks their dashboard. That's the vision. But yeah, so when I was in my enterprise roles, I never really touched mobile. Even in my internal tooling roles at LinkedIn, I never touched mobile. It wasn't until I was moved over to the feed team and now in my current role at SeatGeek that I have had to adapt to become a mobile designer. I think mainly just for the nature of those specific industry or those platforms and where people are using those specific apps. So it's very, very prevalent, at least from what I've seen in the consumer space. It's something that is basically a requirement now, I think, nowadays, if you want to be in the consumer space in some ways, or I guess it depends on the industry, but for ticketing and for social media, it's gonna be on an app or it's gonna be on your phone. And nowadays, almost everyone has a phone and they're like on the internet and things like that. So it's just a very, I guess, a common avenue for people to have in the consumer space. I think someone had mentioned that ServiceNow is kind of shifting to be in the mobile space.
Yeah, so we have a new second command, who I believe might have actually been your previous boss at Google. Amit, yeah, small world. And he is really focused on mobile. So it's something that has definitely been top of mind for a while, but with the shift of top leadership, it's become like laser focused that mobile is in the mix.
Yeah, hey, I'm for it, you know, if it's good.
Yeah.
I think there's so many complex workflows in enterprise tooling. So, I mean, obviously space and real estate is one thing because you can't do everything on your phone, and you might want to like use a monitor to look at like a giant spreadsheet. So maybe new design patterns are going to come up with this kind of like shift to mobile. But yeah, I don't think everything needs to be on mobile. I think each platform kind of has their dedicated user base and their dedicated tasks, but to each their own, you know, if the more the merrier. Yeah.
I think everything needs to be on mobile. Everything can be on mobile, and it will be. So if you go somewhere and they're telling you it's not important, maybe run. I remember, you know, I was working in ad tech, and everybody was like, yeah, they use their laptops. And I was like, yeah, but they run campaigns that run on the weekend, and they're 22 years old and they're at the bar. So how are they gonna stop something from going terribly wrong? They're gonna do it on their phone. So we made a mobile app to be a differentiator, and I had to fight really hard for that. There was so much pushback, it was a bit silly. And then it was great, so we did it was great. But yeah, I think, you know, and it really opens up like the frontline worker scenario too, because they're, you know, they're out there with phones and iPads or, you know, whatever kind of tablet. So it's different screen sizes, you know, you really have to accommodate them eventually.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, like in ServiceNow world and other places too, we have a whole persona. By the way, just adding to the complexity, we have I believe 111 personas at ServiceNow, so quite a lot. I mean, not that you're interacting with each one for every use case, but there's just a lot out there. But one of them is the deskless worker, and that is a very complex persona because this persona does not have a phone that they have access to work. So how do you even get message to them if they don't have a phone, don't have a laptop? You have to think about how you interact with them in a completely different way. Like we created a whole new product that's essentially like a kiosk where someone who's a deskless worker, like a factory worker, on their break can go to this kiosk, maybe scan their badge, or in the future could even be like facial recognition, but be able to get all the information they need without actually having their own dedicated device to do so, which just adds a lot more, I'll say, interesting fun.
Well, one of the topics that's near and dear to me is research, being a research manager here. Can you speak to how research has been a little bit different when you're in enterprise compared to consumer?
Well, can I start with, I saw someone had a full story water bottle. Yes. So for those who don't know what full story is, it's an awesome tool that allows you to actually see what people are doing inside the application. Like it takes full recordings, you can see rage clicks, you can see where people get stuck, and that cannot be used at a place like ServiceNow. And the consumer side, you can totally use it. On the enterprise side, if we told customers that we're like basically putting spy software so we can watch everything they're doing, it would not go super well. And so it just adds a lot more complexity. It's a lot harder to get to see, like especially what the end user is doing. It's relatively easy to talk to a buyer, but like to dig into the depths of the personas within an enterprise historically has been a lot more challenging than getting to the end user at a consumer grade experience.
Oh, okay. I feel like I'm hogging the mic, but yeah, an enterprise company, from my experience, it was definitely harder to talk to the end users. You may have like a customer call where like PM may be like running the call, and you kind of like think about insights that, you know, the customers have been saying, or the company is saying. So it's a little bit more less direct in that sense. So you try to do your best to make the assumptions that you think are going to make the best designs. I do remember even reading like job descriptions or like watching videos on like what a procurement person does, because I wanted to just understand like their role in general, the things that they care about, and just get more information. So I would call that like more of like a secondary research that I was doing more on the enterprise side. On the consumer side, I think like Ben mentioned, like it's very easy to get a lot of data very quickly. They all, in conjunction, I think, to UXR, there's a lot of data scientists that are also, helping to inform design decisions. We look at like charts and metrics and all these things to see, did people click this? Who's looking at this? Where did they come from? How long they're looking at it for? And I don't think that's always the best way, because I think there's a lot of assumptions and implicit things that we can assume, but we don't actually know on the consumer side of things. But yeah, research is has been a little bit more accessible to me as a designer on the consumer front, and it's easier to like send out a survey or get people who have the app downloaded to participate in research and give feedback.
And just to add one more thing, that from the enterprise side, the end user may not know that they're actually using what tool they're using. It's white labeled. They don't know they're using ServiceNow. They just know they go here to do the thing they need to do. So not that it stops the research, but like it adds complexity because they don't necessarily know what they're actually using. They just know it does the thing to get the job done.
You can have both.
Yeah, I think generally it's been hard to get access to people at the enterprise, like Dropbox and HubSpot. It was really hard to get direct access to customers, but I think it depends on the type of company that you're at. So I'm at a startup now at Jasper, and we actually have a direct line to the enterprise customers, where I'm in meetings and having like conversations and interviewing them directly, and then letting them beta test our products and getting feedback immediately before we GA it. So it depends, and that some of that's like having close relationships with the CS team and sales team, and making and act like as a designer, asking to be a part of those conversations so you can learn, and just developing those relationships can be really valuable and helpful to build the relationships and really understand their needs and the problems of the customers. I'm not saying that's possible at every company that's doing enterprise design, but sometimes, depending on the type of company, it's definitely possible to have those conversations.
Yeah, for us, we have a monthly office hours where we have typically about 100 customers, and we started a program last year of just asking if anyone wants to be a design partner, and that's been really helpful at just getting deeper into the organizations and getting better insights.
Maybe add one.
Yeah.
I've noticed that UX research is not as well invested in enterprise, which is unfortunate. I head up a team that includes all of the UX functions, and I've noticed a little drop in the funding for UX research. I think that UX research, especially at a high level, these folks can be, taking research in a larger company, taking research from other parts of the company and really hooking into that, and not necessarily having to run their own, or expanding on or contributing to other people's studies, and then actually coming up with concepts and working with designers to explore concepts and test them. So I think it's a super powerful, important function, and I wish it was a little bit more invested in the enterprise, but yeah.
When we had an initial call last week, we were talking about a lot of the people in this room might be earlier in career and might not know what direction they want to go. What advice would you give them if they wanted to go into enterprise or consumer? Do they have to make that decision? Are you kind of stuck in one path if you go into one? If you can kind of highlight your experience and kind of your thoughts there, it'd be great to hear from the panel.
No, you're not stuck. I mean, is the short answer. I mean, I think it really depends on the type of work that you find excitement from. Like, as we've said numerous times at this point, enterprise is typically a lot more complex. You have a lot more moving parts, you have a lot more layers to work through, and so there's a lot of challenges that can be exciting, but there's also things that might not be exciting. You're working typically in a platform, and that means that you have to adhere pretty strictly to that platform. So there's a lot of constraints often, and there's a lot of dependencies that you can't even do the thing you want to do without this other partner team doing the thing first to set it up. So some of those things can be frustrating if you are the type of person that kind of likes to move fast. You might not be able to do that as well in an enterprise. I remember when I started Salesforce, my boss, I had a beer with him and he told me, you know, I know you're coming from the startup environment. Something that you could create in 2 months at a startup could take a year or two at a place like Salesforce. So just get ready to move fast and also slow. Yeah, I'll pass it along.
What were we talking about?
Difference between enterprise and consumer.
Whether you're stuck in one path or
Oh,
not.
Yeah.
stuck, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you might get pigeonholed though, especially if you do something very specific that's in high demand.
Yeah.
And you might hear from, you know, recruiters about that thing that you do, and they really want you for that thing that you do, but you don't have to do that thing. You can go do a different thing. And I don't want to make it out to be like a recruiter problem, but you know, I think if you have conversations with the right people and you position yourself the right way with the hiring managers and you talk to the folks that make the decisions and you show what you can do, like, I don't know, at Google we hire people and then they move around. Well, they used to. Maybe they will again in the future. So I don't think it really is that important. You know, I think if you hire someone with a consumer sensibility into an enterprise design role, they might struggle. They might struggle with like not having the systems thinking, and they might take a while to develop that, or they might not develop it, and they might not like it. And I think the reverse is true too.
Yeah, I'll just preface this by saying that I'll acknowledge that I've been lucky enough to work at some big logo companies, so to speak, and but I would highly recommend people not chase companies and really chase your curiosities and the problems that those companies are trying to solve way more than focusing on companies. I obviously can say that as like I've seen extreme value from the places that I've worked at, so I understand why people want to seek out large companies and businesses and big name places, but there's a lot of really cool companies out there, startups, small companies that are solving some really interesting, complex problems that would be really, like I saw something on LinkedIn of a company I never heard of that was a startup that was focused on cancer research groups and stuff like that. There's so many companies out there that I don't think people realize, so, but that's what my recommendation would be, is just chase those curiosities and the problems more than companies if you can.
You're all very inspiring. I wish I'd heard all this advice when I was starting out. I don't think that you have to be stuck somewhere, and I don't think you have to choose. I was asked when I was interviewing at Adobe, like, you've done a lot of employee experience stuff, like why are you interested in doing consumer? And I said, I'm still helping to solve people problems. I'm still trying to drive business outcomes through content strategy. I'm still meeting the needs of the business. The user is still a person. And I think that all the skills that I've developed across enterprise and consumer, I'm still using every day on just different problems. So I think that you can choose how you frame your narrative when you are speaking to hiring managers, recruiters, other people, and exploring interests. Have a lot of informational interviews with people. Just like put yourself out there too. If you're curious about a certain role or a certain industry. When I got laid off from Meta, I was like unemployed for the first time for like 9 months, and I put myself out there. I reached out to people like Carol, who leads content design here at ServiceNow, and I'm like, what's content design like at your shop? Like, I'm just hanging out, just trying to learn as much as I can. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable and ask questions and form relationships with people that you've never met. Especially LinkedIn is great for that. Just to ask questions and learn, because it could inform your next career move.
you. I love this question. Yeah, I don't think you're ever stuck. I'm about, I think, 5 years in or 6 years into my career, and I move around a lot. I think a lot of it is about being vocal, you know, about what you're interested in and roles you're interested in, having good relationships with people at work, you know, showing good work ethic. Yeah, just being like a good partner to people. People will see the value as, you know, of your contributions to, you know, your team and the people you work with, and it's a good way to, I think, be able to, you know, put your foot in the door and, you know, make that move into that next step that you want to be in. So for context, I started out as a design system designer. I kind of thought I was going to be stuck in that role, and I couldn't really move into more of like that product or feature space. But I worked with a lot of people on that team because it's more of a platform or foundational team, and I got to meet a lot of managers. I just asked managers, like, hey, do you have roles open? I asked my manager first, though, by the way. But yeah, I asked other managers, like, do you have roles open? And, you know, a role opened, and I was able to switch into a product team. I love the point that made around like startups and things like that. I think those types of environments really allow you to wear different hats and flex that. And so at the end of the day, when you kind of figure out what you like or don't like, then that's a really good opportunity to be able to like switch around and try something new. But yeah, I don't think it's limiting at all, but imposter syndrome is definitely there. I feel it all the time, and you just do it and you see what happens. But yeah.
That's great advice. Great advice. Do we have any questions from the audience? Like, anybody have any questions? Yeah, let me.
Yeah,
I
we can just, yeah.
I can get the mic over
I
there.
think it's off, you might turn it back on.
Okay.
Which one is?
Yeah.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you all so much for each of your sharing your experiences. One of you had mentioned that it was much more difficult to get data from employees of a business and how they're using the software versus consumers. And I was just interested to learn more about why that is, if any of you could speak about that.
Yeah, that was me. I can, or if anyone along the way wants to. Okay, great. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges is just the layers within an organization and the time. Like, for instance, one of our big personas is like customer service agents. It's hard to get to a customer service agent because they're busy doing their job as a customer service agent, and it can be difficult to get to the right person who can get to that person to then set up the time with that person. So I think that's one of the challenges. I think in general, there's this challenge of sort of being protective of the people within the organization. And so often it's pretty easy, I think, to get to like your buyer persona, the person who, you know, bought the product for ServiceNow or whatever company. But digging deeper into those layers, it becomes more difficult to get to the person or even often know necessarily who the right person is that you should be talking to. And anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say too, as designers too, we can probably look at anyone's Figma files, and everyone works and has their files set up in layer and naming and everything set up completely differently. So that's the other thing, is it's really hard to get good insights from that, because how one person uses a product is not necessarily going to be the exact same way someone else is going to use a product. So a lot of nuance attached to that. So like hearing from 3 or 4 different people and all of them using the product, the exact same product, but in 4 different ways, it's really hard to consume that and also know how, like, what to do with that information as well. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of conversations usually.
Yeah, I was gonna add, because I don't think we touched upon it. There's not exactly related to your original question, but within enterprise, you have so many configurations that the product won't look the same to each company, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just adds more complexity, because, you know, if you go to a consumer experience, it's going to be the same thing more or less for everyone who's using it. But if you go to an enterprise like the employee center that I work on, which is like an internal like intranet, it looks super different and functions way different for like a company like Disney versus like Warner Brothers versus like Kroger. So not that that makes it more difficult to, research necessarily, but it just makes it more difficult to design for, since you often can't even fathom what your customer is going to do to the experience.
We have an internal team that's supposed to get these people for us. And it takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can have these panels and we can reuse them. But it just doesn't work that well. And I think also we run into bureaucracy, we run into permissions issues, we run into legal issues. It's like big company stuff. So I think it might be different in a smaller startup. I've had better access in smaller startups, but also the protective thing comes up. So.
If you work in internal tools, it's awesome because you can just ask the employees to do your testing, and it's very accessible, and they're super nice about it. So I love internal tools. I think it's like an awesome place to work, or like a space to work in. On the consumer front, it's super easy because we have your information and we'll send you a survey, and if you want to sign up for it, you do. If you don't, that's okay, but most people sometimes do, and you get a $10 gift card, and so that's why it's very easy on the consumer side. Especially if you're purchasing something and you want a confirmation email, you're gonna give your email to the company. So it's very easy to have that access to customers. And yeah, like everyone else said around the enterprise side, there's those operational layers that don't make it as easy to have that direct access.
That's great. Maybe we can get one more question. Let's see, is this on?
Hello. Hi, I'm Jessica, and I've worked in enterprise software for my whole career. I didn't do any switching back and forth, so I'm really envious of you. But this, I don't know, maybe this is a sensitive question. When you compare consumer product design to enterprise product design, do you think there's a difference in standards of quality? Do you think that the bar is higher? I thought you might, so I was really interested in exploring that idea.
Good question.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the bar has generally, in my experience, been higher in consumer-facing products. And because people have a choice, and there's a lot of them, and there's more like obvious competition. I don't know, and we kind of like, I think our product people make decisions in enterprise that have a lot to do with things outside of the direct user experience. And so we end up prioritizing things outside of the direct user experience for good reason, but also it gets neglected and it's a little painful.
Yeah, +1 on everything you just said. Also, just to add, there's a reason why you hear the term consumer grade, but you don't hear consumer level. But I do think that's changing a lot. Like, at least where I am at ServiceNow, I definitely will say historically, there's been variance in the levels of like consumer grade experiences for everything Shira mentioned, but that's changing a lot of recent. There's a lot more focus on really creating great experiences. And I think especially for like the part of the business I'm on that's employee facing, where employees are used to having this very similar experience that you have, using a consumer product, and expect that when they're, checking news, doing, social features or whatever they're doing. So I think it's changing, but historically, it's not the same.
I think, maybe we can take one more question. We can take one more question.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I just wanted to ask, I had the experience of using AWS for a while now. And it is a very powerful data engineering, data science tool, but at the same time is incredibly annoying to use the tool because it just has so much complexity to it. So I was thinking to myself that maybe the data engineers at AWS were the designers of this tool because it's just too much nuance to it, right? And my question is, how do you balance good engineering as a tool for your enterprises versus the feasibility of the design in order to have a good workflow for even complex jobs of data scientists and data engineers and database managers? That's my question.
It's a great question.
We think about the developer experience as the developer user in a very different way for some reason. And we let ourselves get away with a lot of complexity because of it, and it makes products really complicated like you're experiencing. I think it's unfortunate that, and also one of the contributing factors I think is a lot of these companies, maybe not in the situation of AWS, but their acquisitions from startups where the interface was developed by engineers because they didn't have a UX team yet. And then trying to like turn the boat around is a big problem. It takes a really long time, and I'm sure probably a lot of us here have tried to experience that at some point.
I'll just say one way to try to, I don't know how to solve the AWS one in particular, but it's really important for design to have a solid and a powerful like relationship with engineering. So the more you can be in those conversations and working with them and getting them to like care about some of the things that you care about and pointing out things and opportunities, and but making that a partnership where you're not like forcing it onto them, but like you're working together to be like, what makes sense in the time frame that we have to work on this, and here's some things that I think could be improved, and here's sometimes you have data to back that up, and sometimes they care about that, but I think it's just learning the nuances and things that they care about and getting into their world, asking questions, and then bringing them into your world and bring them along for the importance of design and what design can do is what I've found to be the most useful when dealing with those kind of issues.
Empathy goes a long way. So yes, not only helping them care about what you care about, but making sure you really understand what they care about so that you can speak their language, so that you can be working toward the same outcomes. Sometimes most of the time you develop allies one person at a time. So start with one great relationship with an engineer and have them become your design advocate with their teams. That's the success we've seen with content strategy. It's just forming, even with product design, forming allies with one designer at a time to help them bring us in sooner, at the beginning, preferably. Relationships.
Yeah, just to add to, there's always one engineer that's going to care, and just find that one, and then they can spiral from there. But there's always one, at least.
I kind of forgot what I was gonna say, but I think on the topic of just like engineering, well, I think there's one thing that I think you mentioned, which is the unfortunate situation of having like legacy software that you kind of have to, like that was built by a team of engineers who didn't have a designer, or maybe at the time they were rushing to build something, or the strategy just wasn't there yet to make something a good experience. And unfortunately, that is the case in some of these enterprise worlds right now, and a lot of designers are being hired, or there's a revolution in some senses to redesign and create these consumer grade experiences. So yeah, I think we're there, or not there, but we're getting there, and it's gonna be better. And it all really comes down to like business strategy too, as like, for example, AWS, I don't know what Amazon's strategy is, but maybe they're not directly prioritizing that particular platform right now to make it better and enhance it, but I think those things quickly change, and if, it becomes a priority of the company, they're definitely gonna have these designers, I hope, on the team and helping to like build something that's a little bit more useful. But yeah, I don't know, engineers can do it too. I mean, like they can learn, they can learn too, and that collaboration is, I think, very prevalent now, and it's more prevalent about just learning UX patterns and things like that, and those are things that you can find on W3 Schools or one of those like more engineering heavy websites where people are learning. So yeah.
That's great. Well, I think we're at time, and you know that we're around all the panelists if you want to chat with them and ask more questions. But thank you, each one of you, for answering some wonderful questions and all your insights. Really appreciate it.